My sister dropped her kids off at my house and demanded I babysit them while she went on an 8-week vacation. When I threatened to report her to the police, she arranged to have me assaulted in my own home so she could take them back. I used to think entitlement was just people cutting in line or acting snobby at restaurants until the day I met the Kesslers. And even now, years later, I can still hear the fake politeness in their voices. The kind that's so sugary it burns your throat. The kind that pretends to care while casually stepping on your dignity. And I remember how it started so small. Just a volunteer gig at my daughter's school where I was asked to help organize a fundraiser, Galawanovo stuffy, overhyped events where parents try to outdo each other in who can donate the most, wear the flashiest jewelry, or win the most silent auction prizes. And I said yes because I wanted to meet more people in the community, maybe make a few friends, maybe even shake off the sadness I'd been carrying since my mom died. But I wasn't prepared for people like Meredith Kessler, who walked into that meeting room like she owned the whole school, her heels echoing across the tile, her handbag worth more than my car, her eyes scanning everyone like she was assigning us roles in a play she had already written. And when she smiled at me, I should have known that wasn't kindness, that was strategy. Because within minutes, she was nudging me toward the least glamorous task: logistics, cleanup, donation calls, while she nominated herself for creative director of the event, which apparently meant she picked out a flower theme from Pinterest and ordered overpriced roses from a boutique. She probably owned stock and I didn't complain because I believed in doing my part. I thought maybe if I worked hard, people would appreciate it. And honestly, I was just happy to be included. But then she started asking for more things outside the event, favors here and they're, like picking up her dry cleaning since you're already near the mall, or babysitting her daughter just for an hour or two while I run errands, which turned into 4 hours and an emergency hair appointment. And it wasn't just me. She had this whole web of people wrapped around her finger, manipulating kindness like it was a weakness. And every time I said yes, I told myself I was just being helpful, that maybe she was overwhelmed, maybe she really needed support. But deep down I started to feel it. That hollow ache in your stomach when you know you're being used. And it all came to a head on the night of the gala, a night I had poured my heart into planning, coordinating with vendors, setting up chairs, staying late to wrap silent auction baskets while she showed up 30 minutes before it started, dressed like she was going to the Oscars, hair professionally done, nails perfect, with her husband in tow like a trophy. And I watched as she took credit for everything, telling the principal how hard we worked, gesturing vaguely toward me without ever saying my name, acting like this whole thing was her brainchild and I was just the help. And I still tried to bite my tongue, until she pulled me aside during the dinner and whispered, "Can you move your car? It's ruining the valet photo line." And that was when something in me cracked, because I had parked in the back, in a spot far from the entrance, where no one would see, because I was embarrassed by my rusty old Honda, and for her to still single me out, to imply my presence was ruining her perfect photo op. It made me feel so small, like dirt under her shoe, like I didn't belong here at all. And I wanted to scream at her, tell her off, walk away. But instead I just nodded, walked outside into the cold, and sat in my car for 10 minutes crying, not because of the insult, but because of all the times I let her walk over me, because of how much of myself I had sacrificed to feel worthy of a community that never really saw me. And the worst part is, she didn't even notice I was gone. She didn't care that I missed the rest of the event, that I never came back inside. And by the time I drove home, exhausted and humiliated, I promised myself I would never let someone like her manipulate me again. But the story didn't end there, because the most entitled thing I ever saw her do came months later, when she showed up at my front door, smiling like nothing had happened, holding a gift basket full of designer bath products and saying, "I need a huge favor." At first, I just stood there in the doorway, clutching the frame with one hand like it was the only thing keeping me from falling over, because seeing Meredith Kessler again after that night at the gala made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't lived through the slow burn of being used. And I wanted to shut the door right then and there, but she was already stepping inside, already gliding across my living room like she belonged, commenting on how cozy my place was with that same condescending tone she used at the school, when she'd compliment someone's clearance shoes like they were from a Paris runway, and she handed me the gift basket like it was a peace offering, like lavender bath salts, and an overpriced loofah could erase the way she made me feel that night. But before I could even say anything, she launched into her request, her voice syrupous smooth, explaining how her nanny had quit unexpectedly, how her regular rotation of sitters was all booked, how her mother-in-law was on one of her benders again, and she needed someone to stay with her daughter, Ivy, for a few days, just 2 or 3, maybe 4, if things ran long with the charity retreat she and her husband were attending in Napa. And she said all this like it was a minor inconvenience, like she was asking me to water her plants or bring in the mail, not take full responsibility for a child who wasn't mine, not put my own life on pause to clean up a mess she'd created through sheer neglect and poor planning. And the worst part was, she didn't even ask. Not really. She spoke in expectations, the way people do when They assume the answer is yes before you've had a chance to breathe. And I was so stunned that I didn't say no. I didn't scream or slam the door or throw the gift basket at her feet. I just stood there nodding, my heart hammering in my chest, my brain screaming at me that this was insane, but my mouth, like always, betraying me with a smile and a soft of course. And within an hour she was gone, suitcase wheels clacking against the pavement, designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, and I was left alone with Ivy, who barely looked up from her tablet, who asked if I had almond milk and rolled her eyes when I said no. And those first few hours were fine, awkward but manageable. But then the days stretched on, and Meredith didn't call, didn't text, didn't check in once. And Ivy started asking when her mom was coming back, and I didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to lie to a 9-year-old with big, scared eyes. So I said, soon, and tried not to sound like I was lying. But it got worse after that, because Ivy started getting fevers. Real ones. The kind that make a kid shake and cry and vomit all over your couch. And when I tried to reach Meredith, her phone went straight to voicemail, and her husband's number was disconnected. And I was this close to driving Ivy to the hospital when I finally got a call, not from her, but from the resort's front desk, saying a Meredith Kessler had left them my number in case of any emergency. And I asked them to tell her to call me immediately. And the concierge just said she was off the grid for the wellness retreat and that she would reconnect in a few days. And I lost it. Not on the poor concierge, but after I hung up, just collapsed onto my kitchen floor and sobbed because I didn't know what the hell I was doing, because Ivy needed a doctor, and I had to miss work, and I couldn't afford any of this. Not the medicine, not the groceries, not the time. And I felt so stupid for letting it happen again, for letting her walk all over me because I couldn't say no. And when I finally did take Ivy to urgent care, I had to use my credit card. The one I swore I wouldn't touch again after nearly maxing it out when my mom got sick. And I had to sign all these papers, lie about being her guardian, because what else was I supposed to do? And still no word from Meredith, no apology, not even a message asking if Ivy was okay. And when she finally returned 5 days later, fresh-fit and tanned like she'd just stepped off a yacht, she looked at Ivy, who was curled up on my couch pale and weak, and said, "Oh, is she still sick?" Like she had just dropped off a bag of dry cleaning. And then she laughed, actually laughed, when I told her I had taken Ivy to the doctor. Said I was such a worrier, and I wanted to scream, to drag her out by her overpriced scarf, and tell her she didn't deserve a child. But instead I just stood there shaking, gripping the counter like it could keep me from exploding. And when she left, she didn't say thank you, didn't offer to pay me back, didn't even take the damn gift basket with her. Just scooped up Ivy, said, "Let's get you home, sweetie," and floated out of my life again. And I thought, finally, it's over. Finally I'll never have to see her again. But entitlement doesn't fade, it festers. It grows bolder the more it gets away with. And a few weeks later, when the school board elections came around and Meredith decided she wanted to be on it, not to help, not to serve, but to build her image, to control how the school looked to her rich circle of donors, she called me again, not to apologize, but to ask if I'd endorse her, write a letter of recommendation to the principal, maybe even speak at a PTA meeting about what an amazing, hands-on mother she was. And I wish I could say I hung up on her. I wish I could say that was the moment I finally stood up for myself. But I didn't, not yet, because people like her have a way of infecting yourself, the fourth, of making you feel like helping them is the only way to be seen. And so I said I'd think about it, and she said, "Great. I already wrote a draft of what you could say," and emailed me a full speech, complete with fake anecdotes and buzzwords like community-driven and child-centered, that sounded like they came from a PR firm. And I read it 3 times, stunned by the lies, by how casually she had twisted the truth. And that night I sat in front of my computer for hours, staring at the cursor blinking in an empty document, wondering if I could really do this, wondering if I was strong enough to finally say no, not just to her, but to the version of myself that had let her take so much already. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there in the dark listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside, but mostly to the static in my chest. That electric discomfort that buzzes under your skin when you're too full of words you haven't said out loud. And sometime after midnight, I sat back down at my computer and opened a blank document. Not to write her letter, but to finally write mine. Mine to myself, to remind me who I am, what I've done, how much I've given without asking for anything in return. And with every word I typed, something began to shift in me. Like I was breaking a silence I didn't even know I was trapped in. Like I was taking up space in a world that had always told me to stay small. And I started listing it all, not just what she had done, but how it had made me feel. The way she had used Ivy like a pawn. The way she'd disappeared when things got hard. The way she expected loyalty like it was owed to her simply because she had the money and the name and the face people trusted. And as the sun came up, I had an entire speech written, not the one she sent me, but my truth. And I printed it and put it in my purse. Not because I knew I'd have the courage to read it, but because I wanted to carry something real with me, something that was mine, when I walked into that PTA meeting the next night. And I don't know if I really expected her to be there, but of course she was. perched on the edge of a folding chair with her perfect posture and her perfect teeth and her clipboard full of fake promises. And when she saw me, her face lit up, like we were old friends, like none of the last few months had ever happened, and she mouthed thank you as I took a seat behind her. And for a moment I almost gave in again, almost let her rewrite the story just because it was easier than setting fire to it. But then they called for public comments, and something in me rose to my feet before I even realized what I was doing. And I walked to that microphone like I was walking through molasses, every step heavier than the last, and I unfolded my paper, with shaking hands, and I told the truth not to hurt her, not to get revenge, but because I couldn't keep swallowing it anymore. And I told the board how Meredith Kessler had left her child in my care without emergency contacts, without checking in, without any consideration for what that would cost me emotionally, physically, financially, and I said I didn't think that made her a bad person, but it did make her a deeply entitled one. Someone who saw kindness as a resource to exploit and not a value to protect. And the room went silent, completely silent, like even the walls were listening. And I remember the principal blinking at me like she didn't know whether to intervene or thank me, and Meredith sitting there frozen, her smile gone, her jaw tight, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. And I finished by saying that I wasn't there to start drama. I was there because I couldn't sit quietly while someone pretended to be a leader, when all she had ever done was take credit for other people's work and leave messes for others to clean up. And I walked out before they even responded, before she could say anything, before my courage ran out. And once I got to my car, I sat in the driver's seat and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt clean, like I had taken back something I didn't even know I'd lost. And I thought maybe that would be the end of it, that she would lick her wounds and move on. Find some other poor soul to manipulate. But entitled people don't just disappear when you stop serving them. They double down, they retaliate, and sure enough, a few days later, I got a call from the school saying they had received a concerned report about me posing as a guardian for a child without proper documentation, and I knew immediately where it came from. I knew it wasn't a coincidence, and the school was polite but firm, said they had to look into it, said it was a matter of policy, and even though nothing came of it, even though Ivy herself told the guidance counselor that her mom had dropped her off and never called, I could feel the whispering start, the sign, that drop-off, the subtle way some of the other moms pulled back from me in the hallways like drama might be contagious, and I tried to shake it off, but it clung to me. And for weeks I felt like I was walking through fog, like every good thing I did could be undone by a single lie, whispered by someone in pearls and designer shoes. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it did, because Meredith wasn't content with just smearing me. She had to punish me, and her way of doing that wasn't screaming or slapping or yelling. It was smiling while slicing, smiling while setting things on fire and pretending her hands were clean. And one afternoon I came home to a note taped to my front door, written in thick black marker like a child had done it, saying maybe you shouldn't be around kids at all, and I stood there holding it with shaking hands, trying to convince myself it wasn't her, that it could have been anyone, but deep down, I knew. And even deeper, I knew I had to stop being afraid. I had to stop letting her write the story while I stayed quiet in the margins. So I did something I'd never done before. I went to the school board, not to make another speech, but to file a formal ethics complaint with every email, every voicemail, every piece of proof I had collected, and then I sat down with Ivy's father, who I had never even met properly, and told him everything. And to my surprise, he listened. He didn't defend her, didn't call me a liar, just sat there silent for a long time before saying, I always wondered how she got away with everything. And he thanked me, and a week later he filed for emergency custody. And Meredith lost it not just in court, but everywhere, spiraling into one public meltdown after another, screaming at teachers, yelling at other moms, accusing me of ruining her life when all I ever did was tell the truth. And the irony of it all, the part I still think about, is how entitled she was to think her actions should never have consequences. How shocked she was to learn that just because she was loud and rich and pretty didn't mean she could treat people like stepping stones. And when she finally pulled Ivy from the school and moved across town, the silence left behind was deafening, but also peaceful, like something heavy had finally been lifted off the community's chest. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again, not because she was gone, but because I had finally chosen myself, finally stopped letting other people's entitlement define the limits of my life. After Meredith moved, it was like the school deflated, like a balloon that had been overinflated for too long, finally let out the last of its breath, and the atmosphere that used to feel tight and charged with invisible pressure suddenly felt softer, quieter, safer somehow. Like everyone could finally exhale without worrying about stepping on one of her invisible landmines. And though no one said it directly, you could see it in the way teachers smiled more easily, in the way parents lingered after meetings instead of rushing off, in the way Ivy's name was no longer spoken in hushes or pity or judgment. And for a while I thought that would be the end of it. I thought I had closed the chapter and stepped into a new one, a better one, where people saw me as someone who stood up, someone who told the truth when it mattered, But healing isn't a finish line, it's a hallway. One you have to walk again and again every time something familiar tries to pull you backward. And it wasn't long before I found myself volunteering again, cautiously, hesitantly, because even though I had been burned, I still believed in showing up, in giving back, in trying to be part of something bigger than myself, and that's how I met Clara, a new parent who had just moved to the district. Quiet and observant, with a kindness that felt real, not the kind that came with strings or expectations. And we clicked slowly but surely, not because we were the same, but because we both carried a kind of guardedness. The sort that only shows up after people have taken too much from you. And we started carpooling to meetings, trading off pickup duties, and eventually, I let her in. Told her the story, not everything, not at first, but enough that she understood what Meredith had done, how deep the wound went, and she listened. Without interruption, didn't offer pity or outrage, just presence. And it felt like someone had finally met me at eye level, instead of either looking up at me for being brave, or looking down on me for making a scene. And things were good, better than they'd been in a long time, until the fundraiser committee came up again and Clara nominated me as co-chair. And the room actually clapped, not the fake clapping I used to get when Meredith spoke on my behalf, but the kind that felt like recognition, like people were saying, "We saw you before, and we see you now." And I remember standing there, heart racing, smiling and nodding, and trying not to cry in a room full of strangers and half-friends, because it had been so long since I felt like I belonged somewhere without having to earn it through exhaustion. And that night, when I got home, I found an email in my inbox with a subject line that made my heart sink. Just a friendly head soup pant. Even before I opened it, I knew she wasn't done with me. I knew Meredith had found a way to weasel back into my life. Because entitlement isn't just about what people think they deserve, it's about what they refuse to let go of. And the message was short, anonymous, from a fake address. But I could feel her voice all over it, the way it said things like people have long memories and you might want to stay in your lane, and we all remember what happened with that little girl, and I felt the cold grip of it all over again. The shame, the rage, the tightness in my chest that had taken months to unwind. And I sat there staring at the screen, fingers twitching, not knowing whether to cry or scream, or just delete it. But I didn't do any of those things. I forwarded it to the school board with the simple line, "This is the kind of thing we said we wouldn't tolerate anymore." And I didn't even wait for a response. Because I had learned by now that justice isn't always about getting someone punished. Sometimes it's just about refusing to play the game anymore, refusing to let their poison shape your peace. And for a few days, nothing happened. No fallout, no follow-up, just silence. And then Clara called me late one evening, her voice tense, and said she'd gotten a message. Too, same weird phrasing, same passive-aggressive threats, and she said, "Is this how she operates?" And I told her yes it is, but this time we don't have to take it alone. And she surprised me then, said, "Let's expose it, publicly." And my stomach turned at the thought, because part of me still wanted to hide, to avoid the drama, to just move on and not stir anything. But Clara said, the more we hide it, the more power it has, and she was right. So we drafted a statement together, not naming names, not pointing fingers, just outlining the kind of bullying that happens in parent communities when power goes unchecked. And we sent it to the school's newsletter, to the PTA mailing list, to anyone who would listen, and the response stunned me. Not backlash, not silence, but gratitude. A wave of other parents chiming in with stories, not just about Meredith, but about all the little tyrannies that go unchecked because people are too tired or too scared to speak up. And suddenly the fear I'd been carrying didn't feel like mine alone anymore. It felt shared, diluted by community, by light. And then something incredible happened. One of the teachers, one I barely knew, came up to me after pickup and said, "Thank you for saying what needed to be said. We've been dealing with this for years." And that broke me open in a way I hadn't expected, because for so long I thought I was the only one seeing it, the only one getting crushed by the weight of someone else's privilege. And to realize that it wasn't just me, that others had been suffering in silence too, made everything I went through feel a little less senseless, a little more like something that mattered. And from that point on, it wasn't just about Meredith anymore. It was about drawing a line in the sand, saying no more, not just to her, but to the whole culture that allowed people like her to flourish. And for the first time, I started to dream a little, not big, not wildly, just small things, like starting a mentorship circle for new parents so they'd never have to go through what I did, or creating a shared resource board so no one ever felt alone when their kid got sick, or when life just got too heavy. And suddenly the school didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a place we could rebuild. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the most entitled thing I'd ever seen someone do was try to crush someone's spirit just because they stopped being useful. But the most powerful thing I'd ever seen was a community waking up to itself. Slowly, painfully, bravely, and deciding it wouldn't go back to sleep. I used to think the worst thing entitlement could do was take up space, silence others, demand more than it gives. But what I didn't realize until much later, Everything had unfolded and settled into something that looked like peace, that the true damage of entitlement isn't just in what it consumes, but in how deeply it teaches you to doubt yourself. How it turns your kindness into a question mark, your boundaries into guilt trips, your voice into something you start editing in your own head before you even speak. And for the longest time, I let Meredith Kessler do that to me, not just in the obvious ways, but in all the little echoes that stayed long after she was gone. Like when I'd hesitate before volunteering for something because I didn't want to be too much, or when I'd second-guess a text I sent to another mom, wondering if I sounded bossy or ungrateful or just too assertive. And I hate that about her. I hate that even when she was physically gone, she still lingered in those little instincts. Like she had slipped inside my bloodstream and made herself at home. And it wasn't until Clara and I started that mentorship group, just a simple thing, really, a monthly coffee circle for new parents, where we could talk about real things, like burnout and boundaries and the invisible labor of motherhood, that I finally started to feel her presence fade. Not all at once, not in some dramatic cinematic moment, but slowly, like turning the volume down on a radio station that had been playing the same awful song on loop in my head. And every time someone showed up to one of our circles and said I thought I was the only one, I felt the power she had once held over me weaken just a little bit more. Because that's the thing entitled people count on, that you'll stay isolated, that you'll keep thinking you're the only one, that no one else will believe you or understand or stand beside you when you finally say, that was not okay. And I think if I had learned that lesson earlier, I would have saved myself years of swallowing things that burned going down. But I don't regret the path it took to get here. Not anymore. Because even though it was hard, it made me who I am, and I'm proud of the way I clawed my way back to my own voice. And sometimes now when I walk into the school and see someone struggling with a toddler meltdown or trying to balance cupcakes and paperwork and a baby on their hip, I'll offer to help, not because I'm trying to prove anything, but because I know what it's like to feel like no one's got your back. And if I can be that for someone even in the smallest way, then everything that happened means something. And funny enough, I did see Meredith again, one last time, not long ago, at a grocery store of all places, pushing a cart with her sunglasses still perched like armor on her head, even though it was cloudy outside. And she saw me and stopped. Did that little half smile she always did. Like she couldn't decide if she wanted to acknowledge me or pretend I didn't exist. And I waited to see if she would say anything, if she would try to spin some new version of the truth. But all she said was, "You look good." And I nodded and said, "I am." And then I turned and walked away, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't owe her a performance anymore, not even a polite one. And that felt more powerful than any speech I ever gave, because walking away was something I couldn't do in the beginning. Not with her, not with anyone who made me feel like I had to shrink to be acceptable. And now I don't shrink for anyone. Not at work, not in my friendships, not even in the mirror when I'm wrestling with the voice in my head that still tries to tell me I'm being too much. And I know there are other Merediths out there. There always are. People who think the world owes them comfort and convenience and deference because of the name they married into, or the money they inherited, or the charm they've weaponized. But I also know that the most dangerous thing you can do to someone like that is tell the truth, live the truth, refuse to carry their consequences for them. And the truth is, I survived her. Not just once, but fully, completely, down to my bones. And now, when I see entitlement rear its head, whether it's someone speaking over a teacher, demanding a refund for something they broke, or trying to shame a struggling mom for feeding her kid fast food, I speak up. Not with rage, but with clarity, with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you don't have to win to be right. You just have to stop playing by their rules. And I guess that's what this whole story was about in the end. Not Meredith, not Ivy, not the PTA or the gala or the awful letter taped to my door. It was about learning to recognize when someone is treating your life like an accessory to their own and saying, no, not anymore. And I hope if anyone ever finds themselves in the middle of a storm like I did, tangled in someone else's mess and gaslit into believing they asked for it, they remember this. The most entitled thing someone can do is convince you that your pain is an inconvenience. And the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to apologize for surviving it.